This is the story of J.R.R. Tolkien, one of the greatest British authors of the last century. The imaginary world of a single man has, over the last few decades, fascinated millions of people of varying ages from all over the world. This man created a world in the books The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion amongst others that would be read, reread, analyzed and studied by millions of fans. The last decade, the story The Lord of the Rings has been brought to the big screen, which made this imaginary world accessible to an even greater number of people. The author of these stories and the creator of this world called Middle-earth is a British man called John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, better known as J.R.R. Tolkien. Today, it is the man himself that shall be analyzed as we go through various aspects of his life. In this episode, we will go through his life up to his early adulthood, where his mythology started to emerge. We will also go in depth of his passion for language, which we will soon discover was an essential factor in his life's work. Tolkien was born on January 3rd, 1892 in Bloemfontein, South Africa. His parents, Arthur Tolkien and Mabel Schofield, were both British but moved to South Africa for business a few years before John Ronald's birth. His father died in 1896 while he, his brother, and mother were visiting relatives in England. The family was then left without income, so the mother had no choice but to remain in England with her children to get support from her own family. They established themselves in Birmingham. This is where Tolkien's imagination started flourishing. They lived in the countryside, and the surroundings of their house were like a mystery land for him and his brother to explore as they went on their numerous adventures. His memories from these times were limited and unclear, but they were tender and happy. He recalled, for example, that there was a man they called the White Ogre, and of which they were innocently scared of. It is his mother who took care of their early education, and she rapidly noticed that John Ronald was a keen student. He had many talents and interests. She taught him botany, and from these teachings he developed interest in plants and trees. He started reading and writing from a rather young age. Thanks to his mother, who started teaching him Latin when he was 4, Tolkien developed a strong taste for languages as well as an ability to learn them quickly. He liked the sound of Latin words and enjoyed learning their meaning. The same did not happen when he was introduced to French, even though he would eventually master this language as well. He read a good number of books and stories during his childhood, and while some left him indifferent, others would influence him greatly. In 1900, even though she was from a Baptist family, Mabel Tolkien and her children were received in the Roman Catholic Church. When she died 4 years later, John Ronald would start to see her as a martyr for her faith, and this would greatly affect his own religious belief. Before dying, she assigned the guardianship of the 2 boys to Father Francis Xavier Morgan. John Ronald went to school at King Edward's, where he made 3 good friends, with which he formed a society called TCBS. Amongst their activities were discussions over poetry and literature, while drinking tea at Barra's store near the school. When Tolkien left the school, he had decided to be a poet. In 1911, he started studying at Exeter College, Oxford, where he studied classics before changing to English language studies, which he graduated in 1915. As said before, languages took an important part in his life. He started learning Latin when he was very young and was attracted by its sounds and structure. Its encounter with it was, in a way, the beginning of a passion that would remain with him. He also learned French and German from a rather young age, but they left him quite indifferent. Greek, on the other hand, captivated him in a similar way as Latin had. He was attracted by its fluidity and its hardness, but what made it really interesting to him was that it felt distant from him both in time and space. Welsh attracted him in a similar way and felt like it was an old but nevertheless alive language. He loved the beauty of this language. It is after discovering Greek that the idea of creating his own language started emerging. Spanish was one of his first models, but he soon dropped it once he discovered Gothic. This time, it is the writing that John Ronald Fuld found so attractive, and he had quite a good challenge since the records of the dead language were quite limited. He enjoyed trying to fill the gaps, and in a way, he tried to complete the language. In his last year at King Edward's, he discovered philology and developed a taste for knowing the origin of the languages. This uncommon hobby of his was to follow him through his whole life. He went through many other languages, mastering them all to some degree, and was especially attracted by Finnish. He did not master this language, but it would have a major influence on his invented language, which was to become his Kenya or High Elven. By 1917, this language was already very sophisticated, with a large vocabulary, a solid structure, and invented history linking it to a more primitive language called Sindarin, which was modeled on Welsh. Soon, as his invented languages were becoming more and more concrete, he started to feel like they needed an history. That is when he began to work on his mythology, on his world, which is now called Middle-earth. This is how he wrote what was to become the Silmarillion. Tolkien did not have an easy life, but his effort took him as far as to graduate university with a first class, and he still had enough time to work on his hobby. As all the elements were taking place for his mythology to emerge, Tolkien was to face new challenges which would be as inspiring as they were grueling. In the next episode, we will see how he survived through World War I, but more importantly, we will learn how the idea of one of his most famous characters emerged, that is to say,